Alright, in this last video I will finish up what we were doing on test 2, the review. So we're factoring, we're on number 23. This is definitely has no GCF. We have we have a difference of cubes here. So we know that's a binomial times a trinomial. And we know some number cubed is x cubed, that's x. Some number cubed is 27, that would be 3. We're going to use the same sign. We'll square the x, that goes here. We'll square the 3, that goes here. And then if you multiply these, you get negative 3x, and so we'll put a plus 3x. We use the opposite sign, and so that's how you do that one. All right, on number 24, we definitely have a common factor. Looks like it's going to be 2. 2 times 9x squared minus 30x plus 25. Now as I look inside the parentheses to make sure I'm completely factored, this is a trinomial, so we could use the AC method, but I don't really want to multiply 9 times 25, it's a big number. But the other thing is these are perfect squares on the ends here. So my first guess would be to use 3x and 3x, because that squared is 9x squared, 5 and 5 here, and then we just got to figure out the signs. Well, they're both positive or they're both negative since they multiply to 25, but since we have a middle term that's negative, they must both be negative. And in fact, we need to double check that our inner product, which is negative 15x, and our outer product, which is also negative 15x, needs to add up to the middle term, and it does. And so the only thing left to do here is to put the 2 out front, and there's our factored form of this polynomial. Alright, on 25, we're definitely going to want to factor by grouping. So let's go ahead and group these first 2 terms, and notice we can factor out an x squared, that's all, times 3x plus 4. So when we factor these second 2 terms, we're expecting it to get a 3x plus 4. And of course, I guess we would need a negative 9 here to get that 27, negative 27. Notice negative 9 times 3x gives you the negative 27x. Negative 9 times 4 gives you negative 36, and so that does work. So I have 2 terms with the common factor of 3x plus 4. And we can cross these out, and we're left with x squared minus 9. And so let's see, this is not simplified. Notice there's no common factors or anything here, but this is a difference of squares. We can factor that as x minus 3 times x plus 3, and we still need that 3x plus 4 in the front. And so there's 3 factors here. And finally on number 26, notice there are no common factors here, but this is 2 terms and it's certainly a difference of squares. Let's see, we know 3x times 3x, or times itself, gives you the 9x squared. 4y times 4y gives us the 16y squared. One will be a minus and one will be a plus. All right, so those are all the factoring problems. We're going to be factoring when we solve these quadratic equations, but now the main focus is I need to come up with a solution to the equation. With quadratic equations, we normally get 2. So I hope when you look at 27, you're like, oh, that's a difference of squares. That's going to be x minus 6 times x plus 6 equals 0. Again, this number times itself is that, this number times itself is that, 1 minus and 1 plus. When we set each of these equal to 0, here we're going to add 6 to both sides, we get x equals 6. Here we'll subtract 6 on both sides, we get x equals negative 6. So we have two answers here. So I just want to point out the process which we talked about in class. First of all, you want 0 on one side, and you want the quadratic equation written in standard form. So you want the x squared term, then the x term, then the constant. Here we don't have the x term. And then we factor, and in this case we factor it into these two factors here. Now since you have this times this equals 0, we know that when two numbers multiply to give you 0, one of them must be 0. Either x minus 6 is 0 or x plus 6. And then you solve these equations and you get your two solutions. And by the way, it'd be very easy to check these. If you plug a 6 in, 6 squared minus 36, that is 0. Same thing with negative 6. All right, on number 28, first thing we need to do is get 0 on one side. Let's get the 6x out of there and 0 on the right. Now these are not like terms. All we can do is write them next to each other. We'll put the x squared term first, so we get 8x squared minus 6x is equal to 0. And now we definitely have a GCF here. For 8 and 6, that would be 2. Take the smaller of the two powers of x, that would just be x. And so 2x is our GCF. We know 2x times something is 8x squared, that's 4x. And then 2x times something will give you the minus 6x, that would be a minus 3. So we have 2x equals 0, or 4x minus 3 equals 0. Well, here you can divide each side by 2. 0 divided by 2 is 0. Or just remember, if you multiply some number times 2 and you get 0, that number must be 0. That would be the only way you could get an answer of 0 there. Over here, we're going to want to solve for x, get x by itself, so we'll add 3 to both sides. Get 4x is 3. Divide each side by 4, you get x is 3/4. So we have 3/4 and 0 as our two solutions. And again, one thing we learned about quadratic equations is we normally get two solutions. And again, I want to remind you, we've been solving linear equations where you had the highest power of x was just x to the first. With quadratic equations, our strategy is a little bit different. But you still see us using some of our skills from before because we're solving linear equations when we get to this point here. Well, and when we subtracted 6x on both sides, that's a skill from before. All right, so on 29, the first thing you should do is subtract the 21. You have x squared minus 4x minus 21 equals 0. And then you're going to look for two numbers that multiply to negative 21 and add to negative 4. Notice a here is 1. 1 times negative 21 is negative 21. So there aren't many factors of 21, just 1 times 21 and 3 times 7. We need opposite signs since they multiply to negative 21. And since I want them to add to a negative number, I want to make the bigger ones negative. And you can see that 3 plus negative 7 is going to work. So we'll split our b term here. We get x squared plus 3x minus 7x minus 21. And I'm just going to factor right now. We'll worry about the equal later. So here we can factor out an x. When we factor out the GCF from the first two terms, it'll be x times x plus 3. So when we factor these two terms, we're expecting an x plus 3 in the parentheses. And notice a negative 7 times the x will give you that minus 7x. And negative 7 times 3 gives you the minus 21. So finally, I'm just going to go over here. We end up with x plus 3 times x minus 7 is equal to 0. So we'll set each of our factors equal to 0. You get x equals negative 3 or x equals 7. Oh, and I used up a lot of my space there. Now 30 is a little bit tricky. You might be tempted to move the 15x squared over here, but we normally like to keep our highest powered term positive. So I'm going to subtract 2 and add 7x to both sides. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and do this. Notice none of these are like terms. On the right, we're just going to end up with 0. We have 15x squared plus 7x minus 2. So our AC here, is going to be 15 times negative 2, that's negative 30, and B is 7. So you got to find two numbers that multiply to negative 30 and add up to 7. And I'll let you go through the process. The numbers that work are 3 and 10. And notice one of those needs to be negative. It would have to be the negative, the 3. Notice negative 3 times 10 is negative 30, and negative 3 plus 10 is 7. So let's rewrite this as 15x squared minus 3x plus 10x minus 2. So notice here we can factor out a 3x in the first two terms. 3x times 5x will give us the 15x squared. And 3x times a minus 1 will give us that 3x, the minus 3x there. So when we factor here, we're expecting a 5x minus 1. And notice to get 10x, I'm going to need a plus 2 here. 2 times 5x is 10x, and 2 times a minus 1 is negative 2. And so I'm going to go ahead and go over here. We end up with 5x minus 1 times 3x plus 2. Now that's going to equal 0. So we've got two numbers whose product is 0. Either 5x minus 1 equals 0, or 3x plus 2 is equal to 0. We get 5x is 1. Divide by 5, you get 1/5. Over here, you get 3x equals negative 2. Divide by 3, you get x equals negative 2/3. And so those are your two possible answers, or your two solutions to number 30. All right, we're down to our last two. So we've got a little bit of work to do on number 31. We can't do anything with this the way it is because we don't have 0 on one side. The rule doesn't work for any other number. So you can't say x plus 9 equals 33 or x plus 1 equals 33. Just because these two numbers multiply to 33, it doesn't mean one of them is 33. 0 is a special case. So we're going to have to FOIL this out. And when you do that, you should get x squared. You're going to have a 1x and a 9x, that's 10x. And 9 times 1 is 9. We'll subtract the 33. Get x squared plus 10x minus 24 is equal to 0. So again, I'm not going to go through all the numbers with you here. We need two numbers that multiply to AC, which is negative 24, and add up to 10. Now be careful here. You might think it's 4 and 6, but notice these have opposite signs, and they add up to a 10, so the bigger one's positive. I can't get that to work, but 2 and 12 will work. I need to make the 12 the larger number, and we'll make the 2 negative. Notice negative 2 plus 12 does give you 10. So those are the numbers you want to use. We'll get x squared minus 2x plus 12x minus 24 equals 0. We can factor out an x. Be x times x minus 2. So we're expecting an x minus 2 here. It'll be, let's see, we need 12 there, plus 12. 12 times x is 12x, and 12 times, oops, let me fix that. 12 times a minus 2 gives you the minus 24, so we're going to end up with x minus 2, our common factor, times x plus 12. When you set x minus 2 equal to 0, you're going to get 2. When you set x plus 12 equal to 0, you get x is negative 12. All right, last problem. Looks like we definitely have a GCF here. Let's factor out a 4x. Looks like that's our greatest common factor. 4 goes in all three of these terms. Notice x is the highest power of x to the first. And so let's factor out a 4x. It'll be times x squared plus 6x minus 16. So we need two numbers. Now notice in here, this is a trinomial. We can factor that. We need two numbers that multiply to negative 16. Again, we're just looking in here right now. And add up to 6. And again, I'm just going to save some time by putting in the numbers 2 and 8 are the ones that are going to work. Notice they need to have opposite signs, so one of them will be negative and one's positive. The bigger one needs to be positive, so they add to a positive. And so let's just factor this inner part here. So it'll be a minus 2x plus 8x to replace 6x. And let's just factor right now. For the first two terms, we can factor out an x times x minus 2, which means we expect an x minus 2 here. And notice you need an 8 plus 8. And 8 times negative 2 does give you the negative 18. We get x minus 2 times x plus 8. But don't forget, we had a 4x out front. We just factored this trinomial as x minus 2 times x plus 8, but we still have the 4x out front. And so now we actually have three terms multiplied together that gives you 0. Either 4x equals 0, well that means x equals 0, or, so that's one answer, x minus 2 equals 0, that's going to give us x equals 2. Or x plus 8 is 0, and if you solve that for x, you get negative 8. Notice with binomials, we've been getting two answers. That was our answers there. With a trinomial, we're actually getting three answers. And so this is something that we'll see as we continue our studies and we talk about polynomials later on. All right, but that's it for this test. Good luck on the test.